a title bought with gold, a duke bound by duty, a marriage that was nothing more than a cold signed contract. Alistair, the Duke of Ravenswood, needed a fortune to save his ancestral home. Ilara Vane, a merchant's daughter, provided it. He gave her his name. She gave him her dowry. Love was never part of the bargain. But when the shadows of Ravenswood Keep coalesced, and a hidden enemy threatened to consume its new Duchess, the one man who swore he would never feel became the only man who would stand between her and death. This is the story of a vow made for duty, and a love forged in danger. Alistair Benedict Thorne, the 8th Duke of Ravenswood, stood at the mullioned window of his study, staring out at the rain-lashed expanse of his lands. The view was one of magnificent, decaying beauty. The once proud oaks were thin, the tenant farms failing, and the west wing of Ravenswood Keep itself was visibly crumbling, a testament to generations of dwindling fortunes. His title was ancient, his lineage impeccable, but his coffers were empty. The Thorne name, once a pillar of the realm, was sinking into the mud of insolvency. He despised the situation. He despised the solution even more. His mother, the Dowager Duchess Augusta, had made the terms clear over a tense breakfast. "The Vane girl's father is glutted with wealth from his trade," she had said, wrinkling her nose as if smelling cheap tobacco. "They have purchased half of Mayfair. They are desperate for entry into society. You, Alistair, are the key to that door, and her dowry is the key to this one." Alistair's jaw had tightened. "A merchant's daughter." "A wealthy merchant's daughter," Augusta corrected. "You have a duty. Your father, bless his soul, nearly ran us to ruin with his disastrous investments. You will not. You will marry Miss Ilara Vane, you will secure the dowry, and you will produce an heir. Affection is a luxury we cannot afford." He hadn't argued. Duty was the bedrock of his existence, the cold iron spine that held him upright. Passion was a weakness, a folly that had led his father to ruin. He would not repeat the mistake. The meeting took place not at Ravenswood, but at a neutral London townhouse. Mr. Julian Vane was a man carved from new, hard wood, practical, sharp, and utterly devoid of aristocratic subtlety. He respected Alistair's title exactly as much as Alistair respected his bank ledger. It was a perfect, bloodless transaction. "My Ilara is a good girl," Vane stated, swirling a brandy Alistair knew cost more than a tenant's yearly rent. "She's clever, too clever perhaps, reads books on governance, philosophy, not the usual silliness. She deserves a great name. And I require the means to maintain mine," Alistair replied, his voice flat. "The terms are agreeable. The dowry will be transferred upon the signing of the marriage contract. The settlements on her are as we discussed." "Good, good," Vane nodded. "She's in the drawing room. Perhaps you'd, propose." Ilara Vane was not what he had expected. He had anticipated someone loud, draped in garish new money silks. Instead, the young woman who rose from her chair was quiet, with intelligent, observant eyes the colour of winter heather. She held a copy of Marcus Aurelius, her finger marking a page. She was pale, composed, and possessed a stillness that was almost unnerving. There was no blushing, no simpering. Alistair looked at her, and she looked back, her gaze unwavering. In that moment, he knew she had no illusions about this. "Lady Ilara," he began, the title sounding strange on his own tongue. "Mr. Vane, Your Grace," she corrected softly. "I am not a lady. Not yet." The bluntness was surprising. "Miss Vane, your father and I have come to an understanding." "I am aware," she said. Her voice didn't tremble. He believes my dowry can restore Ravenswood Keep, and I believe your name can silence the whispers that follow me in the street." He found himself standing a little straighter. This was not a debutante dreaming of a fairy tale. This was a woman signing a treaty. It was, in its own way, a relief. He had no warmth to offer, and she, it seemed, did not require it. He executed a formal bow. "Your father has given his permission for me to request your hand in marriage." Elara Vane closed her book, the soft thud of the leather cover sounding like a gavel. "And do you request it, Your Grace?" "I do." "Then I accept." There was no joy. There was no courtship. There were only terms. He was the Duke of Ravenswood, and he was marrying her for duty. She was Elara Vane, and she was marrying him for survival. They were, he supposed, both trapped by their circumstances. It was a cold comfort, but it was the only one available. The rain continued to fall outside, a fitting soundtrack to the transaction that had just sealed both their fates. Alistair left the townhouse without another word. He did not look back. He had secured his estate. He had done his duty. He felt nothing at all. The wedding was a small, brutally efficient affair at St. George's, Hanover Square. It was attended by Mr. Vane, the Dowager Duchess Augusta, and a handful of Alistair's relations, who looked upon Elara with polite, icy curiosity. Elara wore a gown of heavy cream satin, elegant but austere. She looked less like a bride and more like a queen at a coronation she never desired. When Alistair spoke his vows, his voice was clear and cold, echoing in the mostly empty church. When Elara spoke hers, her voice was quiet, but firm. They did not touch, save for the moment he slid the heavy gold signet ring of the Thorne family onto her finger. It felt, he noted with detached observation, like sealing a contract. The carriage ride to Ravenswood Keep was undertaken in near total silence. Elara sat opposite him, not beside him, looking out the window as the lush greenery of the south gave way to the wilder, more rugged landscape of the north. Ravenswood Keep emerged from the mist of the late afternoon like a battleship run aground. It was vast, imposing, and built of grey stone that seemed to drink the light from the sky. The west wing, just as he remembered, was a dark, hollowed-out wound. "It is magnificent," Elara said, her first words in over an hour. "It is old," Alistair replied. He stepped out and offered her his hand. Her gloved fingers were cold as they brushed his. The staff was assembled in the great hall, a cavernous room where the tapestries were faded and the air was chilled despite the roaring fire. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, was a severe woman in black bombazine. Mr. Hobbs, the butler, looked as ancient and unmoving as the suits of armour that lined the walls. They bowed and curtsied. "Welcome home, Your Grace," Hobbs intoned. "Welcome, Your Grace," he added, turning to Elara with a fractional, barely perceptible hesitation. The title, Her Grace, the Duchess of Ravenswood, settled on Elara like a heavy, borrowed cloak. Their first dinner was a trial of silence. They sat at opposite ends of a mahogany table, long enough to seat 40. The Dowager Duchess Augusta, who maintained her own rooms in the dower house but had insisted on welcoming the new bride, was the only one who spoke. "You will find, Elara," she said, her diamonds glittering, "that managing Ravenswood is not like managing a shop ledger. We have traditions. Mrs. Davies will instruct you on the running of the household." "Thank you," Elara said, her voice even. "I am, however, quite proficient with ledgers. My father insisted upon it." Augusta's eyebrow arched. "How? Practical." Alistair said nothing. He ate his venison, drank his wine, and wished he were in his study. As soon as the meal was concluded, he excused himself. "I have estate business to attend to," he said, not looking at his new wife. He retreated to the one room in the castle that felt like his own, leaving Elara to the mercy of his mother. Elara, however, didn't flinch. She simply nodded to the dowager and said, "If you will excuse me, Your Grace, I should like to retire. The journey was long." Her rooms were vast. A fire had been lit, but it did little to warm the space. Her new lady's maid, a young girl named Alice, looked at her with wide, nervous eyes. Elara dismissed her kindly and sat on the window seat, looking out at the same bleak landscape Alistair had surveyed. She was now a duchess. She had traded her fortune for this cold, echoing prison, and a husband who looked at her as if she were a new piece of furniture, necessary, expensive, and inanimate. The next morning, she did not wait for Mrs. Davies. She went to the study. Alistair was already there, a fortress of paperwork surrounding him. He looked up, surprised. "Your Grace." "Your Grace," she returned. "My father's bankers completed the transfer this morning. The first portion of the dowry is in your accounts." "I see. Thank you for informing me." "I would like to see the estate ledgers," she said. Alistair frowned. "That is not necessary. My cousin, Mr. Thorne, manages the estate finances." "Your cousin, Mr. Reginald Thorne?" Elara asked. "The gentleman who smiled so brightly at the wedding?" "The same. He is my land agent. He handles all expenditures." "Then I should like to review his work," Elara stated. It was not a request. "The dowry is an investment, Your Grace. I intend to see it well spent. The West Wing, for example. What is the estimate for its repair?" Alistair was taken aback. "I am awaiting a report from Mr. Thorne." "I see." Elara moved to the bookshelf. "You have a commendable collection. But the accounts, Your Grace. If we are to be partners in this transaction, then I must have all the information." Impatient and slightly impressed against his will, Alistair gestured to a tall cabinet. "As you wish. They are extensive." For the rest of the day, Elara sat at a side table in his study, a place no one, not even his mother, dared to occupy without invitation. She worked with a silent, focused intensity. She did not speak. She did not sigh. She just read, her pen making small, sharp notes in a personal journal. Alistair tried to work, but his attention was drawn to her. He had expected tears, or perhaps demands for new gowns from Paris. He had not expected this quiet, calculating competence. Late in the afternoon, Reginald Thorne himself arrived. He was a man of contrasts, charming smile but shifty eyes, expensive waistcoat but worn boots. He stopped short upon seeing Elara. "My dear cousin," he boomed, striding over to her. "The new Duchess, gracing the dusty old study. Alistair, you beast, you are keeping her all to yourself." He bowed low over Elara's hand. "Your Grace, a delight." "Mr. Thorne," Elara said, not smiling. She indicated the ledger before her. "I was just admiring your bookkeeping. You have a very creative approach to expenditures." Reginald's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "I do my best, Your Grace. Alistair has never had a head for figures, have you, old man?" "Elara is merely familiarizing herself," Alistair said, feeling a strange need to defend his cousin's work, though he had never truly inspected it. Of course. Reginald beamed. "Well, do not let me interrupt. I only came to fetch the new tenant agreements. You must join us for dinner, Duchess. We must toast to this new, prosperous chapter." As he left, Elara watched him go, her expression unreadable. She turned back to the ledger, her pen hovering over a single entry, repeated monthly, for a staggering sum, paid to a Mr. T. Graves. The hearth at Ravenswood was cold, Ilara thought, and she was beginning to suspect it was not just because of the stone. The days at Ravenswood settled into a cold, polite routine. Alistair and Ilara met at breakfast and dinner, speaking only of the weather or the most superficial of estate matters. He spent his days in the study or riding out to the tenant farms, grimly assessing the work that needed to be done. Ilara spent her days with the ledgers. She quickly discovered that Reginald Thorne's creative bookkeeping was, in fact, dangerously negligent. Figures were transposed, rents uncollected, and expenditures for repairs were listed with no corresponding invoices. And then there were the payments to Mr. T. Graves. They were large, regular, and listed under estate improvements. She brought it to Alistair's attention during one of their strained dinners. "Alistair," she began, forgoing his title in an attempt to breach the fortress. "These payments to Mr. Graves, they total nearly £5,000 in the last year alone. What improvements has he made?" Alistair put down his fork, annoyed at the intrusion. "Reginald handles the suppliers. I trust him implicitly. He is family. He has managed the estate since my father's health failed." "He is managing it poorly," Ilara said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "There are no invoices. There is no company record for a T. Graves builder. Where is this money going?" "Ilara," he said, his voice hardening, "I appreciate your diligence, but you are the Duchess. You are not my steward. Reginald understands the estate. You understand London shops. Please, leave the running of my lands to me." The insult hung in the air, sharp and cold. He was dismissing her as a merchant's daughter, a woman who knew only of commerce, not of land. Ilara's eyes flashed, a brief flicker of fire. "You are mistaken, Your Grace. I understand numbers, and these numbers tell a story of either profound incompetence or outright theft." "That is enough!" Alistair's voice cracked like a whip. He stood, his napkin thrown on the table. "You will not accuse my cousin in my own home. His loyalty is beyond question. You are new here. You do not understand our ways." He left the dining room, the sound of his boots echoing on the marble. Ilara sat alone, the food untouched. He had not defended his cousin with logic. He had defended him with blind, familial loyalty, and he had insulted her in the process. The rift between them widened into a chasm. The next day, Ilara abandoned the ledgers and began to explore the keep. She told herself it was to learn her new home. But truly, she needed to escape the suffocating silence of the study. Ravenswood was a labyrinth of forgotten rooms and draughty corridors. She found her way to the infamous West Wing. It was sealed off by a heavy, locked oak door, but beside it, a smaller, less conspicuous door, likely for servants, was slightly ajar. Curiosity, and a healthy dose of defiance, compelled her to enter. The wing was a tomb. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that pierced the boarded-up windows. Furniture was draped in white shrouds, like a congregation of ghosts. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and decay. As she moved deeper into the wing, she heard a sound, a soft creak from the floor above. "Hello?" she called out. Her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. She dismissed it as the old house settling and continued on, finding herself in what must have been a grand ballroom. The chandeliers were dark, webbed with shadows. At the far end, a massive, floor-to-ceiling tapestry depicted a hunting scene. It was magnificent, but its upper rod, a heavy brass pole, was visibly pulling away from the stone wall. She stepped closer to examine it, noting the rotten plaster. As she did, the sound came again, louder this time, a definitive thud from the landing above her. Before she could react, there was a groaning tear of fabric and plaster. Ilara looked up in horror. The heavy brass rod was giving way. "Get back!" a voice shouted. Reginald Thorne burst into the room from a side door, his face flushed. He lunged, tackling her at the waist, sending them both sprawling backward onto the dusty floor. A heartbeat later, the massive rod, weighing hundreds of pounds, crashed to the ground precisely where she had been standing, shattering the marble tile. Ilara lay breathless, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dust filled the air. "My dear Duchess," Reginald gasped, helping her up. He was pale, but his familiar, charming smile was already reasserting itself. "You must not wander. This wing is a death trap. Are you all right? Did it strike you?" No, I am fine. Thank you, Reginald. You saved me." "Pure chance," he said, brushing dust from her sleeve with a proprietary air. "I saw you enter the wing and thought I'd best fetch you before you got lost. Good Lord, what a disaster." He kicked at the fallen rod. "This whole place is collapsing. See? This is what I must contend with daily." Alistair arrived moments later, drawn by the crash. He saw the dust, the shattered rod, and his cousin helping his wife to her feet. "What happened?" Alistair demanded, his eyes dark. "Our new Duchess was exploring," Reginald explained, his tone light. "This old relic nearly took her head off. Luckily I was nearby. No harm done, eh, cousin?" Alistair looked at Ilara. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were fixed on the point of impact. "Are you injured?" he asked. His voice was stiff. "No, Your Grace. Mr. Thorne was timely." "This wing is forbidden," Alistair said, his voice clipped. "For this very reason. You will not enter it again." He turned and walked away, not offering her a hand, not waiting to see if she could follow. Ilara stood, trembling, as Reginald watched her. "He's a cold man, Your Grace," Reginald said softly, his voice full of false sympathy. "Burdened by duty. He doesn't see the woman before him. But I do. I am glad you are safe." Ilara barely heard him. She was looking at the fallen rod, and she was remembering the thud she heard from the floor above, before the rod fell. It wasn't the sound of a house settling. It was the sound of a boot. Alistair's reaction cut her deeper than the near accident. He hadn't shown concern. He had shown annoyance. He had delivered a reprimand. That night, she locked her bedroom door. The cold of the castle was seeping into her bones, and she was beginning to feel that the whispers in the stone were not just the wind, but warnings. The incident in the West Wing solidified Ilara's isolation. Alistair retreated even further, his manner so cold it was a physical barrier. He seemed to regard her as a liability, another problem to be managed. He did not ask about her health. He merely ordered the West Wing door to be bolted and barred. Reginald Thorne, conversely, became her shadow. He was always present, offering a sympathetic ear, a warm smile, or a diverting story about Alistair's boyhood. He was always a serious lad, Reginald confided one afternoon over tea. Always felt the weight of the world. His father, my uncle, was the opposite, all passion and grand schemes. He invested heavily in the American canals. Lost a fortune. It broke him. Alistair swore he would never be ruled by emotion. He would only be ruled by duty. The story, meant to foster sympathy, only confirmed Ilara's suspicions. Alistair saw her as part of that duty, a financial obligation, and now a physical one. 2 weeks after the accident, a letter arrived for Ilara. It was not in her usual post. It had been left on the sill of her open bedroom window, weighted by a small, sharp stone. Alice, her maid, found it and brought it to her, eyes wide with fright. The paper was cheap, the handwriting crude and forceful. "Duchess, your father's gold is stained with the blood of good men. He built his fortune on the ruins of others. That money is cursed. It will not save Ravenswood. It will bury it. Leave the castle and your duke, or you will pay the debts Julian Vane left behind. This is your only warning." Ilara's blood ran cold. Her father. Julian Vane had been a ruthless businessman. She knew that. He had rivals, men he had bankrupted. She had always assumed that was the world of men, a world of commerce she was sheltered from. Now, that world had followed her here. Her first instinct was to go to Alistair. This was a threat not just against her, but against his home. She found him in the stable yard, overseeing the reshoeing of his hunter. "Alistair," she said, clutching the letter. He turned, his expression impatient. "I am busy, Ilara. This is important. It is a threat. A threat?" he sighed, turning fully. "From whom? A disgruntled tenant? A local poacher? I don't know. It was left in my room. It concerns my father." She held it out. He took it, his riding gloves creaking. He read it, his face impassive. Then, to her astonishment, he crumpled it in his fist. "Crude nonsense," he said, tossing it to the ground. "Nonsense! Alistair, it's a death threat. It is a pathetic attempt at extortion from a local who resents your father's new money," he said dismissively. "They think to frighten the new Duchess. Do not give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Hobbs will ensure the windows are locked. Now, I have work to do." He turned back to his horse. Ilara stood, stunned into silence. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had belittled her. He refused to see the danger because he refused to see her. His pride, his obsession with his duty and his family name made him blind. He saw her as the source of the problem, the new money that attracted flies. Humiliation warred with a cold, rising anger. She would not be dismissed like a hysterical child. He believed it was a local. She suspected it was something far more specific. The ruins of others. She had a sudden, vivid memory of a name her father had cursed years ago. A partner he had forced out, a man named Silas Croft. If Alistair would not protect her, she would protect herself. She returned to the study, but not to the ledgers. She sat at the desk and penned 2 letters. The first was to her father. She kept it vague, asking about his old business partners, specifically any who had grievances. The second letter was more difficult. She wrote to Mr. Harding, her father's man of business in London, a man who had taught her to read balance sheets. She asked him to use his resources to investigate 2 names, Silas Croft and Mr. T. Graves. She enclosed a generous bank draft for his trouble. She gave the letters to a stable boy she trusted, along with a gold sovereign, instructing him to ride to the next town and post them himself, ensuring Mr. Thorne saw nothing. That night, as she lay in her cold, separate bed, Ilara felt a profound shift. The marriage was a sham, the husband a block of ice. The castle was hostile, and a tangible threat was now circling. She was entirely, utterly alone. But the fear was solidifying into something else, determination. She looked at the crumpled threat, which she had retrieved from the mud. "You will pay the debts." "I am not my father," she whispered into the dark, "and I will not be driven out." She began to study the household more closely. She learned the servants' schedules. She noted which doors were locked and which were not. She made a point of walking the grounds, familiarizing herself with the estate's layout, and she started carrying a small, heavy letter opener in the pocket of her dress. Alistair, consumed by the estate's restoration, noticed only that his wife had grown quieter, more distant. He mistook her silence for acceptance. He had no idea it was the silence of a strategist planning her next move. He was busy rebuilding his stone walls, oblivious to the fact that the enemy was already inside. Alistair was changing, though he would have sooner died than admit it. His work was, for the first time, bearing fruit. Ilara's dowry, which he had despised as a symbol of his failure, was mending roofs, buying seed, and draining flooded fields. His tenants, who had been gaunt with worry, were beginning to look hopeful. And all of it, he knew, was thanks to the woman he barely spoke to. His animosity toward her merchant sensibilities had curdled into a grudging respect. He found himself watching her. She was not the decorative creature he had assumed a bride would be. She was efficient. She managed the household with a quiet authority that had even Mrs. Davies nodding in approval. She cut waste, reorganized the kitchens, and did so without a single raised word. One evening, he sought refuge in the library, weary from a dispute with a tenant farmer. He found her there, not by the fire, but at a study table, surrounded by books. He had assumed she would be reading novels. He was wrong. She was bent over a large map of the estate, her brow furrowed in concentration. Beside it were books on crop rotation and land drainage. "You are a long way from the household accounts, Your Grace," he said, his voice softer than he intended. Ilara looked up, startled. She did not blush or hide her work. "I was cross-referencing Mr. Thorne's reports on the North Fields. He claims the land is sour. But according to this text, the issue isn't the soil, it's the water table. Your drainage plan is focusing on the wrong valley." Alistair moved closer, intrigued despite himself. He looked at the map, then at her notes. She was right. He had been following Reginald's advice, which was based on his father's old, flawed assumptions. Ilara, with her shopkeeper's logic, had seen the simple truth. This is correct," he said, stunned. "We could save thousands." "Yes," she said simply, as if it were obvious. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. Her face was smudged with ink. Her hair was coming loose from its pins. She was not a classical beauty, but her intelligence was a palpable force. It was attractive. A sudden, unwelcome warmth stirred in his chest. He felt an urge to thank her, to sit with her. Before he could speak, the door opened. "Ah, there you are." Reginald Thorne bustled in, his face a mask of cheer. "Alistair, Hobbs said you were hiding, and you found our brilliant Duchess. Plotting to take over the county, are we?" The moment shattered. The warmth vanished, replaced by Alistair's habitual frost. "Ilara was offering a suggestion on the North Fields," Alistair said stiffly, stepping away from the table. "A suggestion." "How wonderful!" Reginald beamed, patting Ilara's shoulder. "But you mustn't weary your pretty head with such dull things, Your Grace. That's what Alistair pays me for. Come, Alistair, we must discuss the new timber order." Alistair gave Ilara one last, unreadable look, then followed his cousin from the room. Ilara watched them go, the warmth she had seen in her husband's eyes extinguished. Reginald's interruption had been perfectly timed, perfectly casual, and Ilara was now certain, perfectly intentional. A week later, her reply from Mr. Harding arrived, delivered by the same trusted stable boy. She locked herself in her room to read it. Harding's report was thorough and terrifying. "Silas Croft," he wrote, "was indeed your father's partner. He died in a debtor's prison 5 years ago, penniless and raving, blaming Mr. Vane for his ruin. He left no known heirs." Ilara's blood chilled. A dead man? The threat was not from Croft. It was from someone using Croft's name. But the second part of the report made her forget the first. "Mr. T. Graves is not a builder. He is Thomas Graves, a notorious London moneylender and blackmailer, known for preying on the gambling debts of the aristocracy. He operates from a discreet office in Mayfair. He is dangerous, Your Grace, and I strongly advise you to have no dealings with him." Ilara's hands began to shake. Thomas Graves, the estate improvements, £5,000. This wasn't incompetence. This was a systematic, criminal siphon. She pulled out the estate ledgers she had hidden in her rooms. She looked at the dates. The payments to Graves had started 3 years ago. They had increased dramatically in the 6 months before her marriage. Reginald Thorne. He was the only one who authorized payments. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying speed. Reginald, the charming, impoverished cousin. Reginald with his expensive waistcoats and worn boots. Reginald who was always there, always smiling, always present. The near accident in the West Wing, the thud from the landing above. Reginald, saving her. He hadn't been saving her. He had been pushing the rod. He had tried to kill her. But why? The dowry, her arrival, her proficiency with ledgers had threatened his entire operation. He was stealing from Alistair. The payments to Graves. Was Reginald being blackmailed? Or were they partners? She looked at the threat again. "Your father's gold is stained." It was a plant, a fabrication. Reginald had written it. He'd used the name of her father's dead rival, Silas Croft, to create an external threat. He wanted to frighten her away from Ravenswood, and when she hadn't fled, he had tried to kill her, making it look like an accident in the death trap, West Wing. He had failed. Now he was cornered. A man who had tried to murder her once would undoubtedly try again. She had to tell Alistair. But would he believe her? He had dismissed the letter as nonsense. He had defended his cousin's loyalty. He would see this as a further insult, a fantasy woven by his paranoid, new-money wife. No, she could not go to Alistair without irrefutable proof. She looked at Harding's letter. Operates from a discreet office in Mayfair. Reginald was planning a trip to London at the end of the week. He'd announced it at dinner. To procure new seeds, Alistair. The best quality, of course. Ilara knew, with chilling certainty, he was going to meet Graves, to deliver another payment, or perhaps to plan his next move. She had to find the link. She had to find the correspondence between them, and she knew exactly where a man like Reginald would keep his private papers, not in the main study, but in his own small private office off the estate room. She would wait until he was gone. Then she would find the proof that would bring him down, or die trying. A storm broke the night Reginald was due to return from London. It was a vicious, howling gale that turned the Ravenswood grounds into a churning sea of mud and shadows. The wind rattled the ancient window frames, and the sound of the West Wing groaning under the assault was a low, mournful cry. Ilara had failed. She had spent the 2 days of Reginald's absence in a frantic, secret search of his office. She had picked the lock, a skill she'd learned as a curious girl on her father's ships, and had torn the room apart. She found receipts for gambling houses. She found bills from tailors, but she found no letters from Graves, no second ledger, nothing to tie him to the extortion. He was too careful. He was due back tonight, and she was out of time. She sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with trembling hands. Alice had been dismissed. She felt the cold dread of failure. Reginald would return. He would see that his office had been disturbed, and he would know. He would act, and she had no one to turn to. A soft knock came at her door. It wasn't Alice. It was Alistair. She opened it, surprised. He stood in the hallway, his face uncharacteristically pale. He looked uncertain. "Ilara," he said, his voice low. "The storm is worsening. I wanted to ensure your windows were secure." It was a flimsy excuse. He had never come to her rooms before. "They are secure, Your Grace," she replied, her voice tight. He hesitated, not leaving. "I was in the library. I implemented your suggestion for the north fields, the drainage calculations. You were correct." "I am glad," she said, devoid of emotion. He took a step into the room, his eyes scanning her face. "You have been distant since the incident in the West Wing. You called me a liability. You dismissed a threat on my life as nonsense. I am merely behaving as the transaction you married, Your Grace. Quiet and out of your way." The words hit him like a physical blow. He flinched. "Elara, I was wrong. My pride, this estate, it blinds me. The threat, it unnerved me, and I acted poorly." He reached out, as if to touch her arm, then let his hand fall. "I am sorry." The apology hung in the air, a fragile, impossible thing. Before Elara could process it, a frantic pounding came from the main stairs. It was Hobbs, the butler, his face ashen. "Your Grace, thank God, it's Mr. Thorne. He's back, but there's been an accident." Alistair was moving instantly. "What? Where?" "His carriage overturned at the old bridge. The driver is here. He says Mr. Thorne is trapped. The water is rising. He's calling for you. He says the Duchess's dowry is in danger." "The dowry?" Alistair grabbed a heavy cloak. "Stay here," he ordered Elara. "Lock your door." "No." Elara grabbed her own cloak. "He mentioned the dowry. This involves me. I am coming." He stared at her for a second, saw the iron in her spine, and nodded. "Hobbs, gather the stable hands. Bring ropes." They ran out into the tempest. The rain was a solid, freezing sheet. The old bridge was a quarter-mile distant, spanning a gorge that was now a raging torrent. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. The carriage was on its side, wedged against the bridge's stone pillars. One horse was down. The driver was weeping on the bank. "Mr. Thorne, he's in there!" the driver shrieked. "He wouldn't leave. He was yelling about a cash box. Said it was the Duke's money." "Reginald!" Alistair roared over the wind. A faint cry came from the carriage. "Alistair, help me! The box! It's the estate money! It's falling!" Alistair waded into the churning water, the stable hands behind him with ropes. Elara held a lantern high on the bank, her skirts soaked and dragging. "I see him!" Alistair shouted. He plunged into the water, fighting the current. He reached the carriage and tore open the door. Reginald was inside, clinging to a heavy metal strongbox. "Alistair, thank God, help me! I couldn't let it be lost!" "Leave the box, you fool! Give me your hand!" Alistair grabbed his cousin. "No, it's for Graves! He'll ruin us!" Reginald screamed, his face a mask of terror. The name hit Alistair like a bullet. Graves, the name from Ilara's ledger, the name he had dismissed. "What did you say?" Alistair's voice was deadly. "Graves, the moneylender. I owe him. He's been blackmailing me. The gambling debts. My father's debts. He was going to expose it all. This payment, it's from the dowry. I was going to pay him and—" The roar of the river was suddenly deafening. The carriage groaned, the wood splintering. "You've been stealing from me," Alistair said, the realization dawning in all its horror. It was just to keep Graves quiet, until the dowry. But she started asking questions," Reginald shrieked, his eyes wild. "The tapestry! It was meant for her! She wouldn't stop! I had to! The blood drained from Alistair's face. He looked from his treacherous cousin to the woman standing on the bank, holding the light, the woman who had tried to warn him, the woman he had insulted. The carriage shifted violently. Reginald lost his grip on the strongbox, which fell with a splash and was gone. "No!" "Alistair, the bridge is giving way!" Elara screamed. Reginald, mad with fear and confession, grabbed Alistair. "It's all her fault, if she hadn't snooped." He pulled a small pistol from his coat. She has to die. Then it will all be fine. He levelled the pistol, not at Alistair, but at the light on the bank. At Ilara. It happened in a fraction of a second. The wind, the rain, the roar of the water. Alistair's choice. He roared, a sound of pure, primal rage. He didn't try to wrestle the gun away. He didn't try to reason. He lunged in front of his cousin. He stood between her and death. The flash of the pistol was bright, the report swallowed by the storm. Ilara screamed. Alistair staggered, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. But his momentum carried him forward. He grabbed Reginald by the throat, his grip iron. "You will not touch her," he snarled. With a final desperate surge of strength, he hurled his cousin from the carriage, not toward the bank, but into the deepest, fastest part of the current. Reginald shrieked as the torrent took him, sweeping him away into the darkness. Alistair slumped against the carriage, his hand clamped to his chest. "Alistair!" Ilara screamed, plunging into the water, fighting her way to him as the stable hands threw the ropes. "Alistair!" He looked at her, his eyes dark with pain, but clear for the first time. The ice was gone. The duty was gone. "Ilara!" he gasped as her hands, small and shaking, grabbed his. "He's gone. You're safe." He collapsed into her arms as the waters of the gorge raged around them. The world contracted to a single point of focus. Alistair, bleeding in her arms. The stable hands, spurred by Ilara's frantic commands, managed to get a rope around the Duke's chest and drag him from the wrecked carriage to the muddy bank. The storm was already abating, its violent purpose served, leaving a chilling, damp silence in its wake. "Get him to the house. Now!" Ilara's voice was not the voice of a duchess. It was the voice of a field commander. She tore strips from her own petticoat, pressing the sodden fabric against the wound in his shoulder. It was high, messy, but, please God, not in his heart. They carried him, a dead weight, back to the keep. Mrs. Davies met them in the hall, her face a mask of horror. My God. My God! Boiling water, linens, and fetch Dr. Marlowe. "Tell him it's a gunshot," Ilara ordered, never taking her eyes off Alistair's face. They laid him on the long mahogany table in the great hall, the same table where they had shared their silent, miserable dinners. For the next 2 weeks, Ravenswood held its breath. The bullet was removed by a grim-faced Dr. Marlowe, who pronounced the wound grievously serious, but not immediately fatal. Infection, he warned, was the true enemy. Ilara never left his side. She sent the Dowager Duchess Augusta, who had arrived in a flurry of lavender-scented panic, away with a firm, "I will manage this." And she did. She sat in the chair by his bedside, the same study chair she had used to decipher the ledgers. She cooled his brow when the fever raged. She held his hand when he thrashed in delirium, murmuring of his father, of debts, and of Ilara, safe. She managed the estate. She met with the steward, she paid the staff, and she dictated letters to Mr. Harding in London, authorizing him to cooperate with the authorities regarding Thomas Graves's criminal enterprise. Reginald's body was found washed ashore miles downstream. The county magistrate ruled his death a tragic accident. A verdict Alistair's men, loyal to their wounded master and his brave new Duchess, did nothing to correct. Alistair woke to the smell of old paper and lemon water. The fever had broken. He opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw was Ilara. She was asleep in the chair, her head resting on her arms on the edge of his bed. Her hair was undone, falling over her shoulder. An ink stain was still on her cheek. He saw, in the harsh morning light, the exhaustion etched around her eyes. She had been his sentinel. He moved his hand. The pain was a dull, heavy throb, but it was manageable, His fingers brushed her arm. She awoke instantly, her eyes flying to his. "Alistair?" "Alara," he rasped. His throat was dry. Tears welled in her eyes, not of fear, but of profound relief. She poured him a glass of water, her hand shaking as she held it to his lips. He drank, watching her. The wall of ice that had stood between them had been shattered by a bullet and washed away by the storm. He saw her now. Not the merchant's daughter, not the dowry, not the transaction. He saw the woman who had decrypted his ruin, who had stood on a bridge in a tempest, and who had not left his side. "You stayed," he whispered. "Of course I stayed," she replied, her voice thick. You stood in front of me. He was aiming for you." The memory was sharp. "I could not let him. You saved my life, Alistair." "You," he countered, his voice gaining a small measure of strength, "saved Ravenswood. While I was blinded by pride, you were finding the rot." They were quiet for a long time. The sounds of the castle, a maid sweeping, a clock chiming, filtered into the room. It was peaceful. "Reginald?" he finally asked. "He is gone, Alistair. The authorities. It's over. Graves is being investigated. The estate is secure. Your estate," she clarified. Alistair shook his head, a slight, painful movement. "No, not my estate. It is our estate." He reached, wincing, and took her hand. His was warm. Hers was calloused from her work. "Alara, I married you for duty. It was a cold, dishonorable bargain, and I treated you as part of it. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool." "You were burdened," she said softly, her thumb rubbing the back of his hand. "By your father's legacy, by duty. Duty is meaningless without a core," he said, struggling for the words. "That night at the bridge, when I saw him aim the pistol, it wasn't duty. I didn't think of the estate. I didn't think of my name. I only thought, I cannot let him harm her." He squeezed her hand. "I would see Ravenswood crumble to dust before I let anyone harm you. The contract is fulfilled, Alara. The dowry is spent, the name is secure. But my marriage, if you will have it, has only just begun." Alara looked at the man in the bed. His proud, cold mask was gone, replaced by a raw vulnerability that was more compelling than any ducal strength. He was no longer the Duke of Ravenswood. He was Alistair. She smiled, the first genuine smile she had given him since her wedding day. "Well, Alistair," she said, her voice clear and strong, "the West Wing still needs a new roof, and the ledgers are still a mess. It seems you and I have a great deal of work to do. Together." He brought her hand to his lips, a gesture of profound respect. Together. He had married her for duty, a duty he despised. He had married her for his lands, not for love. But as the Duke of Ravenswood healed, tended by his Duchess, he learned that the foundations of a house and a heart are not built on cold stone or old names, but on the fierce, unshakable loyalty of the one who stands with you in the storm. The foundations of Ravenswood are no longer cold stone. They are built on a new, unshakable bond. The contract is over, but the story of the Duke and his Duchess is just beginning. What did you think of Alistair's sacrifice? Did you see Reginald's betrayal coming from the very beginning? Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below. This story was a journey of duty, danger, and a love that was forged in the most unexpected fire. If you loved this historical romance, and if you believe that even the coldest hearts can be thawed by courage, please show your support by giving this video a like. Share it with a friend or fellow romance lover who needs a story to sweep them away. And most importantly, Subscribe to our channel for more full-length dramas and historical tales every single week. Don't forget to click that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for listening.